Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a very special open classroom event offered as part of the 2021 Indigenous Knowledge and Sustainability Conference. I'm Janet Gillow, the Director of Professional Development here at the Brown School, Washington University in St. Louis. So glad to have you with us. For those of you joining on the Zoom webinar, you probably know the deal by now that we can't see or hear you. We also can't call on raised hands, but the chat feature is enabled, and we're loving the opportunity to interact with you. Please do keep that up throughout the program, as there will be a chance to ask questions and send in comments. I want to also extend a welcome to people joining on YouTube. We are not able to moderate chat on YouTube and want to make you aware of that. So if you're joining Open Classroom for the first time, I just want to briefly explain that this has been the Brown School's effort to connect with community throughout the pandemic. We've learned and gotten comfortable with the power of these virtual tools in ways that we never would have anticipated, and recognize that it makes it easier to share the intellectual life of the school with our longtime friends and new ones, wherever they are in the world. So this is about our 132nd, believe it or not, recorded program or live program, and recordings of everything that we've done are available free of charge. We mean them to be resources, and this program will join that library on YouTube. I'll share a link in case you'd like to access something that's come before. But as far as what's coming in the future, I'm just briefly going to tell you what's coming next week, and you are welcome to come back to join us for anything and everything we're doing. On Tuesday, October 12th at 10 a.m. Central, Dr. Benjamin Kudu is joining us from the Ivory Coast. He's going to be delivering a talk on contributions to the elimination of infectious diseases in West Africa. That's part of the Africa Speaks series. On Wednesday, October 13th, Dr. Leila Ismailova with the University of Chicago is delivering a program on improving child and adolescent mental health, opportunities and challenges for multi-level, culturally congruent preventative interventions. And then finally, 1 week from today, on October 14th, our own Wupong An is launching a new series on artificial intelligence in the social sciences. His talk is called Artificial Intelligence, Applications, Promises, Pitfalls, and Misperceptions. So we're glad to have you here today, and we would love to have you come back. And now to launch today's program and introduce our speaker, please welcome Kelly Thompson, Brown School alum and director of the Kathryn M. Buder Center for American Indian Studies here at the Brown School. Please take it away, Kelly.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janet, and thank you for collaborating and offering your wisdom with our Indigenous Knowledge Steering Committee and the Buder Center. We so appreciate that. I'd like to just begin our program this afternoon by welcoming everyone and beginning with a land acknowledgement. And I'll just quickly share that today I come to you from the ancestral homelands of Native people, the Osage Nation, the Illini people, and the Missouri peoples, as well as other tribes who have called what is now known as St. Louis, Missouri, their home. These Indigenous peoples use their knowledge and sustain this land and our environment since time immemorial. And they continue to teach us this wisdom today and carry this knowledge within their communities. And this is why we come together today as well, to learn from each other, to learn about this knowledge, to hear from their wisdom so we can use it in our lives today. The presentation we will hear today from Electa is the second event in a series of events happening between October 6th and 10th. Regional institutions have partnered to create these events to advance research and education in Indigenous knowledge and sustainability in the St. Louis region, but also nationally. These partners include the Whitney R. Harris World Ecology Center at UMSL, the St. Louis Zoo, the Missouri Botanical Gardens, and the Native American Studies Program and Center for Spirituality and Sustainability at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and then the Buder Center as well. And so I'd like to thank everyone for attending. For those who have joined us since I dropped the link to receive Robin Wall Kimmerer's books, Braiding Sweetgrass, in the chat, I'll just go ahead and drop that in there again. So you can go ahead and fill out that form so we can get that gift out to you as soon as possible. And so it's my privilege now to introduce Electa Hare-RedCorn as our speaker this afternoon. Electa is Pawnee and is a PhD candidate at the University of Arkansas School of Public Policy. She is a health policy research scholar, a national leadership program supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to build equity by investing in scholars from populations traditionally underrepresented in graduate programs, whose research, connections, and leadership will inform and influence policy toward a culture of health. Electa is also a 2009 Brown School graduate and Buder Scholar alumna, and she'll talk today about how Native women are changing policy and land stewardship by acknowledging and implementing just transition in agricultural development. And for those of you in the audience who may have questions as Electa's presenting and sharing her information, you can feel free to drop those in the chat or use the Q&A function. And Janet and I will be reviewing those and collecting those throughout the talk, and we'll get a chance to ask those to Electa towards the end of her presentation. And with that, I will ask Electa to begin her presentation.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Janet, so much. I'm so happy to share time and space with you today. And I am actually calling from Pawnee, Oklahoma, home of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. So thank you. I wanted to open this as my Pawnee people do begin and end everything we do with a prayer. And so this is a prayer that I'm still learning, and I think it's all okay to acknowledge that we're still wrapping our head around and embracing and learning and relearning and continuing to perpetuate our cultures and our language. So I had actually created this. It's hard to see, sorry, but it's like a canvas, and it's got stars, and then it's got a brooch like we would dance. Sorry about that, the lighting was off. But it has a prayer on it, and I just wanted to share. And like I said, I'm practicing, and a lot of our knowledge, for me anyway, I see it as being a toddler, being, picking up, adapting, soaking up things as best as I can at my age, like a sponge. So if you'll just join me in reverence, I'll begin. Atius arus kitaku tirawahat, dada chikstehu, derusku, dira sa kariki, dira tatpara. Our Father in heaven, I am grateful for giving me this day of my life. Every day that I'm able to wake up and greet the sun with my Wajaji daughters, I feel like I have a fresh slate, a clean slate, a fresh start. And my first thing that I love to do is run out to the garden or go out to a hill close by our home and check out what wild plants and what sand plums and what new things are showing themselves. So as you all are probably aware, right now we have a big monarch migration, going from Canada down to Mexico. And in that way, I want to acknowledge our First Nations relatives to the north and also our relatives to the south in Mexico, the Oaxaca people, who I'll tell you about in a little bit. Also, just all the college students who have been persisting through this time and giving themselves rest when they need it. I think we'll all appreciate after this talk how we can align our spiritual and prayerful and cultural values as we develop some of these policies, particularly in ag and food sovereignty. And so I just wanted to say that it's so important to acknowledge our relatives, and that's what we always do in our prayers. And I think that when I am praying now more than ever, I include the plant relatives and our bison relative and other living things in the waterways. So I have a PowerPoint presentation I'm going to pull up right now. Oh, actually, you get to watch a video first. I am Pawnee. I am married to a Wajaji man, and we live on the Osage Nation territory in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. My dad is Yankton, he's Dakota, and my grandma was Wichita, and my namesake, Electa Metoxen, was Oneida. So when I came to WashU, I learned a lot about things I should have learned a long time before I hit a master's program. And so I'm really delighted to see this open classroom format because I think, especially in a time like we are in today, there's going to be intergenerational people passing by the screen, listening from home. Maybe it would go directly to dinner dialogue at a table, or maybe it would inspire some collaborations or partnerships, across entities. So I'm going to mute myself for just a second.
Bashisa Sho Suwa I Ach Ukonska Watanka Apa Opshiwa Wanombre Shkadse Kik Dawa Ah. Braiding the Sacred is an expanding network of indigenous corn growers from the four directions, unifying to preserve and perpetuate our traditional varieties of sacred corn. Our gatherings connect leaders and budding seed keepers around the central role corn and other traditional foods play in the health of our communities.
This Braiding the Sacred is expanding, and it's showing a big explosion in our Native communities on the awareness of eating our own foods again.
There's this underlying pulse of people that are really getting involved with it again, and I wanted to try to get the kids back into it. So
we like for our children to be involved. We would love the opportunity to bring them up here to be around other natives from other parts of the nation, just to learn, just to be acquainted with them, and then just to see people work together.
Braiding the Sacred is an effort to promote and preserve and network the different ways in which Native peoples attempt and succeed in many cases to preserve their food sovereignty.
Man, it's been an awesome experience just to be around, see what other tribes are doing. I think it gives me hope for my nation. Maybe I can bring something back to them.
It's going to take a little time. It's going to be a process to get from seed to the part where we can disperse it out into the community and back onto the tables.
I saw the diabetes, the heart disease, the high blood pressure, the arthritis, all these different things that are related to diet. And I thought we have to get back to eating our traditional foods.
What we can do in our home is we can provide that opportunity to grow healthy food. We have control of our household, what is done in our home, in our land, our property, and also on another scale in our tribe, in our community.
Oh, I think you're muted, Electa.
Thank you. I just was closing out of this, so it'd be easy to open up my little PowerPoint so you guys could follow along. So I'm really grateful for being in this seat today, and it is no greater seat or lower seat than anyone that is on the audience or at home or out working today or maybe serving overseas today. It is in my cultural teachings. My grandmother Marlene Writing had told me towards the end of her life that our creator, in our perception, Pawnee people, he or they walk beside us. They're always with us. So we are definitely a very prayerful and reverent people. And we've needed that over time for, blessings and survival. And in the last 25 years or more, we have very prayerfully approached a way to perpetuate our own seeds at the Pawnee Nation. And so this next PowerPoint is going to share how the Pawnee Seed Preservation Project came to be. I hope you enjoy it and feel free to ask any questions as I go. This is just our story, one story from one of the 567 tribal nations. Maybe it's 72 now, but it's up there. And I just wanted to give you a preview into the world of how this story came to be. I graduated, like Kelly said, in 2009. And when I did, I started to pursue a behavioral health license at home. And I did that until the birth of the pregnancy of my second daughter in 2013. But in child development and children, youth and family services and family services, we always learn about leaps and ages and stages and these different concepts that help us understand the growth through the seasons of our children's lives. And having that knowledge can be a blessing and a curse, because I felt that as a young parent, I was not quite ready to guide or direct some of the situations and challenges that parents that were older than me faced. I think they call that imposter syndrome today, but honestly, I can speak more authentically as a parent of 3 daughters today. And I know it's going to be a wild ride, hopefully a safe and wild ride over the next 10 years as my daughters come of age. But I just wanted to say that it's been an amazing trip to be able to be a young mother, understand child development, and then be able to translate some of that to plant growth, plant development. It's just been a great crosswalk. So here is my presentation, and I'm just gonna let you listen. All right, so
there's a couple of apps that are open on your desktop that are partially obscuring the presentation for the audience.
Thank you. I'll get that out there. So the apps would be, let's see, whoops, sorry. Okay. Are they totally obscuring, or is it?
So there were what looks like pop-ups from other things, calendars or something that was creating a dark square. It's not shared with the audience, but it makes it harder for them to see your presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Let's see, I just have my PowerPoint slide up here, and this I can close.
It could be, for example, chat windows or Zoom navigation. And
okay, yeah, it was the Zoom nav. Thank you.
It'll do it to us every time.
Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. So, can you see the screen?
At this moment, there's no screen share.
Okay, I took it off. I'm sorry. Thank you for your patience. I've been out of school presentation mode for a little while. So here we go. Zoom.
We have all been there.
Yes. There we are. There we go. And here. that's what I can do. Is that okay? You see it? All right. So as I mentioned earlier, around 2000, I graduated in 2009. I moved back to the Osage Nation Reservation with my partner and pursued some behavioral health certifications in case management. Back then it was called Systems of Care, and it was helping youth navigate multiple systems. So whether they touched juvenile services, whether they touched foster care, whether they touched just out of home placement and things like that. Maybe they were at risk of a detention center sentence or something of that nature. And we just helped them navigate through that system with a strength-based approach to social work. And it was just a wonderful way to learn. And I started my small family and moved back closer to Pawhuska, Oklahoma, and which is an hour from my home nation of Pawnee. And this woman in the middle of the screen, her name is Deb Echo Hawk, and she has been our Pawnee Keeper of the Seeds since 1997 or so. And she became a mentor to me because she was dear friends with my grandmother. She had started some gardens there in Pawnee as an education director. And she had saved seed in a previous life, I guess, when she lived in other places. But when she came home, she started to hear stories of people missing the integral and powerful way that corn is a part of our way of knowing as Pawnee people. And so we were just out of kismet, we were approached by a woman in Nebraska who was working at a museum, and she was working at a museum education center and museum garden. And she called the Pawnee Nation one day, and she tried to track someone down who did any gardening, any ag, anything like that at the Pawnee Nation. She had recognized that there was no representation of the Pawnee people in the existing visitor center. It was a museum that went over a highway, and she wanted to incorporate one of our Pawnee Earth Lodges, one of our traditional homes, and she wanted to incorporate a corn garden with traditional heirloom varieties of seed. But when she called down to us, she found out that we didn't have a seed bank at the time. We didn't have a food sovereignty project. We didn't have a program of that nature. We knew that corn was important to us. We knew we prayed with it, and we prayed for it every day. We knew that about our grandmothers and our great grandmothers, Atikas and Uppets. But what we didn't know is that it was probably down to only about 75 kernel of seed at one point in time. So what that means is in the 1870s, the Pawnees walked down from Nebraska. And on that way, we were able to carry some seed with us in some of our prayer bundles and these different things that are very reverent instruments to us. They're relatives to us. And we were able to bring those, but we lost so many people along the way that sometimes we had to bury those or hang those bundles at that time in trees as we walked down from Nebraska, giving it a rightful home in nature, in its own kind of ecology. And there came to a point when we weren't sure if it was still our right, or we should still carry them forward as prayers and as living relatives with different policies in the US government. I'm sure you might be familiar, but there's been policies that, for example, uplifted certain type of crops and then kind of hold other traditional heirloom ancestral varieties at kind of a lower standard or lower grade because of market value and current conditions. But we just wanted to find a way to teach the next generation about seed preservation. So we started with this little partnership with Ronnie O'Brien at the Kearney, Nebraska Visitor Center. Also featured on your screen, as we build out our programs and policies for the Pawnee Seed Preservation Society, we knew it was important to have a seed blesser. And to the left, Laura Mae Melton, she works for the Pawnee Nation, and she is a federal grants manager. She's so good at what she does, so knowledgeable. She writes so well. She's an awesome administrative type of social work grant writer person. I appreciate her. But also her mother was one who was a nurse at our Indian Health Service in town, our clinic. And her mother was Geraldine Howell. And her mother, Geraldine, was known to deliver blue corn mush to our relatives who were in the hospital and ill and infirmary. Her mother inspired her through the way she tended to her corn plants in her small plot by her house, through her stories of how they harvested as a community back together when they first arrived in Oklahoma from Nebraska. We went through a lot of transitions, but there were some things that were crucial, and prayer has always been crucial to us as Pawnee people, as well as serving corn and boiled potatoes and meat, but basically having corn at every ceremony and funeral and major function. And then over here to the right is our dear friend Montserrat Leon, and she's a collaborator, and she has a really unique partnership with the Wihatica tribe, or Wihatica people in southern Mexico. And at this current time, she works for a college where she helps them organize their own seed project, their own seed bank. And she keeps us on the up and up about ag economics, because that was what she studied at Oklahoma State. That's how we met her. She also gave us critical things to think about how to keep our spirituality and our faith and our own concept of the seasonal calendar and the stars and when we would plant and things like that, to keep those in the forefront of this project, that it's not just about funding, it's not just about after school program for youth, which is so important, but it's more about the building generational knowledge transmission of our prayerful way of being. And she saw that and she appreciated it, and we appreciate her. So as I mentioned, whenever I finished or took a small break from my clinical social work practice, I was getting my license, and I decided, I'm going to just stick close to my grandmas. They're both getting up in age. I've been away for a few years at St. Louis in school. And so I was close to my mom at the Pawnee Nation. I took a few jobs over there to be closer to Pawnee. And one of the jobs I had was a school-based therapist, and, providing supportive services, case management support also to students in K through 6th grade at Pawnee Elementary, which is where I had attended elementary. So it was really nice to serve my old school and see some of my teachers that were still there. But what was the nicest is that I was able to incorporate some of my cultural viewpoints into my counseling approach, mainly in the sense where if I had a child who
It's 13 hours.
If I had a child who was exhibiting any maybe self-destructive or symptoms of trauma, or, just needed something to either nurture or be nurtured by, I found that I could take them a chocolate mint from our downtown farmers market, and I could take a chocolate mint plant. I could take it to the student, and because of the sensory stimulation and the calming of the mint, and the touch and the feel and the fact that you interact with the plant by watering and take care of it, for that in a clinical setting, for me as a Native practitioner, it was important to acknowledge that he saw that plant as a relative and that he had a responsibility to nurture it. And so for a young man to turn from being what some might call combative and just not classroom oriented, air quotes, his compassion and his connection and his ability to speak about his feelings really elevated whenever I was able to share with him a plant. So I shared that little story with my grandma, and she thought it was neat. And I shared it with this Deb. She's laughing right here in the braids, Deb Echohawk. And she loved it, and she said, "You know what? We need you on this project that we're developing. We need you to be a bridge for the youth and children." And having gone to WashU, my specialization was children, youth, and families, and it also included what they called at WashU at the time, revitalization of depressed communities. Where I'm at today, I don't agree with revitalization of depressed communities, because that insinuates that we became dependent, that we are not capable, that we are a depressed community in a negative light. And so I reframed my concentration at WashU to really build up community development and ag policy, ag support. I mean, it just kind of steamrolled after I fell in love with having a mentor, and also fell in love with the idea of learning from the plants as we went along. So Deb is here. I just circled her face. She's smiling, laughing with our friend Ronnie O'Brien. And Ronnie lives in Nebraska, in our homelands along the Platte Loop and Republic River. She lives in Shelton, Nebraska. And she just wanted to grow Pawnee seed for the Pawnee people, just to let other people know about agricultural biodiversity, that there are other different kinds of plants and crops besides some of the monocrops we see today, and that we had our own unique scientific approaches to taking care of those things. And so here they are. They're the starting founders of our Pawnee Seed Preservation Society. It started out as a project, and now it's moved to a 501c3. Here, laughing and smiling with us, is Kahita Barnoski, and she was an intern with me. I had taken on 3 interns over a series of about 5 years, and she was my 3rd intern. She was a person who I asked a pre-interview assessment. How are you a part of the food system? Why is food important to you as a Pawnee person? And she just looked at me, and she's smart and she's brilliant and a musician. And she goes, well, I eat. And at that point in time, which was about 4 years ago, she ate. She knew she ate. She didn't realize she was part of this bigger food system. She didn't realize at the time that we were recruiting her and supporting her, and she's doing her own thing now, but we're so proud of her because she is going to be one of the first data scientists who is able to help us conduct research in a culturally significant way on our home crops. She's a data scientist, and I think they call them an agronomist, but she went to University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's able to study in our homelands and get to know these landrace varieties of maize, corn. And we're just so proud of like where she's grown and developed. So as I mentioned earlier, we have our own ways of knowing, and our, seasonal planting methods, and we would read the stars as Pawnee people. We would interpret the seasons and the planting times, and we would harvest in our traditional way. It was beautiful, and it was a different time. But today, our hopes of Rahisa tomorrow is to reconcile some of the historical trauma, and we're making efforts with Kahita and others on our collaborative team to protect and perpetuate the seed as seed and food, and as part of our living relative, our history, our living ways of life. They're still alive. Aunt Deb always begins the presentation, and I'll share with you because it's important for each of us to acknowledge that there are different creation stories across different people, different cultures. And so in the beginning, Pawnee descended from the sky. The first woman was wrapped in corn husks and held the seeds of life within her. First man was sent down in a buffalo robe, and when discarded, a herd of buffaloes sprang forth, thus establishing our first homeland. Life was good as we had our relatives, Father Buffalo and Mother Corn. Pawnees cultivated crops in homelands of Nebraska and Kansas along the Loup, Platte, and Republic rivers. The Central Plains Pawnee, we prospered and interacted with people from all over the world through trade routes. In the 18th century, over 60,000 Pawnee lived in permanent earth lodge cities. As you can see here, the Pawnee is comprised of 4 bands of people: the Chowi, the Pitahawirat, the Kikohaki, and the Skeety. Our Pawnee men hunted buffalo, small game, and fished the waters. Our women tended gardens, collected wild plants, and produced healthy meals. As homesteaders settled, Pawnees formed many partnerships and took on many roles of service, learning from one another. These stories stand as testament to the human spirit. In fact, the US government considered Pawnees a friendly tribe. We embraced Americans and took part in every military conflict, beginning with US Army Pawnee Scouts who assisted in ongoing conflicts and guarded Union Pacific Railroad workers from 1865 to 1877. Following white settlement and encroachment by other tribes, the Pawnees ceded our territory to the US government. We moved from Nebraska to Oklahoma, most of us down here by 1875. And as I mentioned earlier, we brought our seeds with us. A tragedy because many tribal members had died during those hunger years. We were numbered at 60,000 when we lived in Nebraska. And then by 1910 in Oklahoma, Indian Territory, and then Oklahoma, we numbered just over 600 people, from 60,000 to 600 in a matter of decades, I would say. I really believe decades. This marked the beginning of Pawnee Nation's historical trauma. Amidst the pain of losing lives, the Pawnees were pleasantly surprised to find sand plums and persimmons near rivers, like in Nebraska. So when we got to Oklahoma, there was some comfort in seeing some familiar seed and plant and foods. Despite this, we quickly learned that the soil was different. The nutrients along the soil banks were different. And even the sound of thunder was different, as our ancestors have told us and passed down. The seeds did not thrive well in the hard clay of Oklahoma. And despite this, crops were grown and studied in 1915 by Will and Hyde. They had documented the characteristics of all Pawnee corn varieties at that time. This is a contemporary Pawnee agency. And the Pawnee agency was responsible for the divvying up Pawnee land into allotments, breaking them into individual tracts. And so traditional farming families slowed in the 1930s as Native youth were no longer living in family households, but were boarded at the Pawnee Industrial School. That is an intersection where we can see that our youth no longer retain the ancestral seed knowledge after assimilation into mainstream education. When 30 years of boarding school was over, so was farming. Our seeds were nearly lost for over the 148 years due to reasons beyond boarding schools. Our communal living, our village living, when the earth lodges had changed to checkerboard style fractionated land allotments. The farming styles and industrial tools changed. And despite industrial school training, farming equipment could not be bought. So seeds were stored with families and they were not grown out. We were just face front with an entirely new system. And so all we had then, and continue to have at some points in time, it feels, is our prayers and our songs, our language, which we are revitalizing. But at the time, things were looking pretty bleak. So this is a picture here of it was penciled in 1998 by artist Buddy Lone Chief. This is our elder Nora Pratt, and she blessed the corn that was still planted in 1998 by Deb and others. She blessed it with a prayer reminiscing about our ancestors and how the corn tasted, and hoped the corn would feed our Akitaru, our people, again. That prayer alone inspired the formation of the Pawnee Seed Preservation Society. Our tribe has a cultural committee and an Asharo Traditional Council of Chiefs. And so Deb had went forth and asked at the time if the chiefs would make a call to the tribal members, different people in the community, to see if anyone had seeds that they could kind of put into a collective that we could try to germinate and revive. So that's when Deb began organizing the seed bank. I didn't join her till, like I said, 2011. But she was doing some really good partnerships and work at the grassroots level from at least that long. And it's just really been amazing to see the project grow. Getting the varieties back, it took many years. This is a prayer instrument. This is our basically our bundle. We sometimes waited several years to open them, only to find 20 seeds of one type of corn. I wasn't a part of that opening, but I think it was beautiful that people felt like prayer and spirituality were a necessary part of our future or tomorrow. So they acknowledged the power of the bundle and the plants that were within it at that time. Some of the seeds that were recovered failed to germinate, and sometimes we had less than 20 seeds per variety. Corn felt like it was on the brink of extinction. As chance would have it, Miss Ronnie O'Brien reached out to Deb, and she asked if Deb and the tribe would trust in her as a Nebraska farmer who was familiar with the soil, the weather, the insects, and other intruders to help bring back the crops of the Pawnee through the horticultural cycle. Excuse me. She was incredibly excited to be involved with the project that could bring back to Nebraska crops that were grown here in the 1800s by the Pawnee. And Ronnie is O'Brien. Ronnie's from an Irish family. She's from a Catholic family there. And it's just amazing, a transformation of reverence, respect, and scientific knowledge exchange with also some old folk wisdom of her dad's knowledge being a corn farmer in Nebraska. It was really beautiful. And it was a challenge that the cultural committee was approving of. And they weren't quite sure about what it'd be like to have a Chadikstaka, a white person, grow our corn. But they thought, if we don't, then who will? You know, we could lose this. And so Ronnie's background and heart, she was blessed to accept the challenge of helping to start growing out the corn again. This is some of our other varieties from 148 years ago that actually were found in a like a cellar that was hand carried from our homeland to Pawnee, and a family brought it forth after they had kind of seen some of the progress and were impressed by the dedication to the seed rematriation. This is now that we're at a point where we're starting to be able to grow our Pawnee corn again. We grow it in Nebraska with 18 other garden sites besides Ronnie, but we're able to start to practice some of those food and prayer and seeing the different stages of the corn. Like I mentioned, children, youth, and families have ages and stages. The corn has different times when it's right to pick it, when it is milky stage, you know, when it is dried for seed. It's just amazing to see the lifespan and to compare it as a living relative to our lifespan as humans. Today, the seed bank has 19 varieties of Pawnee corn and other crops. And you can just see the varieties here that we're working on restoring. Not only do we have corn, we also have watermelon, which are so delicious. They can grow up to 45 pounds. And I felt so connected to the watermelon, and I still do. And I write about it any chance I get because my grandfather was a watermelon salesman in 1930s Pawnee when my grandma was a baby. And he would take his watermelon to town. He would sell it at the courthouse. He would take it to the African-American school neighborhood, and he would take it to the nurses at the clinic. And then whatever he didn't sell, he would take home and my grandma could enjoy it. It was really a blessing for her to taste those foods and be with her family at that time, because a lot of children were in boarding school. But she had been pulled out of boarding school by her mother and father because she lost a sibling. Her sibling died in boarding school. And when that happened, my great-great-grandparents brought her home, and she said just spoiled her and just gave her whatever she wanted. But, you know, they had been through a traumatic loss. And so they really instilled in her cultural pride. She could recall some language, but she was not fluent. And she just carried herself in this really strong writing in a way that it's hard to describe, but if you see it, you'll know it. It was beautiful. And so I always love to use her words and say, we remember a time when our food had a heart. So we remember when the watermelon had a core to it that is different from what you would buy at the store today. And it was sweet and it was juicy, and they call it the heart. So I'm thankful for her cute quips and strong prayers that got us through many years of seed preservation. We also grow out bush beans, magpie beans, and squash. We've been working with a scientist in University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And as you can see, he's the chairman of the technical steering group of the U.S. germplasm enhancement of maize. So germinate or recover the embryo from landrace varieties utilizing the genetic information from the seed, not necessarily modification, but trying to get it back to its original strain by crossbreeding with its own strongest phenotypes. So we have new hope for old crops. We've seen such growth. These are the garden sites across our homeland in Nebraska. Wouldn't be possible without a collaborative approach to Indigenous sustainability. And you can see it goes along our different rivers. Loup River, as Pawnee people back in the day, we used to call this oots, and it meant potato because there's a wild potato called American groundnut. We call it oots. It's a potato you can eat. The root is a tuber, and the top is like a bean or like a pea. So it's just funny that we love potatoes so much today. My kids will say, I want a Pawnee potato. It's basically a boiled potato cut in half with maybe some salt on it. But we have a traditional linkage to the potato. Also, the Platte River and the Republican River. You can see some of the genetic variation here of our ancestral corn. Sometimes we'll take on the traits of a corn original called teosinte, the grandfather corn. And basically, I say that because you can see the kernels growing in the seeds of the tassels, which is not a contemporary characteristic of corn, but it's more of an ancestral genetic trait, and it's exciting when that happens. It reminds us that basically all corn is a tall grass, is a variety, of grain that is a tall grass. Okay, so like I said, Deb's taken on many interns throughout the years. I'm in the garden here. That's in Central Community College in Nebraska. And then over on the right is Sonny Howell. And he is actually Laura Melton, the seed blesser's brother, and Geraldine Howell's son. And he's a veteran, and he's so dedicated and really grateful for all his labor through the years. And then at the top here, we have Kahita Barnowski, Ronnie O'Brien, Mikai Clark, and myself, Electa Hare-RedCorn. And we were enjoying a picnic before two of us had to go home from the internship. And Kahita was stepping on in her first year of interning. And now she's in graduate school. So we're so proud of her. And Mikai is administrator of the wellness program, formerly framed as the diabetes program, diabetes prevention, but wellness. And then I'm a student at the University of Arkansas, a health policy research scholar who is charged and very happy to research in a way that peels back the layers of onions of policy so that we can get to the core of how things were changed. And then we can acknowledge some of the strengths of the scientific, Indigenous scientific ways of knowing. And I'm just honored to be here with you today, but also just to share such a beautiful project with these Pawnee people. So this is upside down, but my mentor actually put her, turned her yard into mounds, all mounds, and it's a corn yard as opposed to a grass lawn here in Pawnee, Oklahoma, because she's really wanting to see success. So she put some soil amendments within each mound. This is Mikai. We were charged as data collection interns, but basically we were just looking at corn characteristics from the height of the corn to when it developed hair, they call it pubescence, to how the kernels were showing themselves, how the tassels were showing themselves, how the root systems were showing themselves. Neither of us had ag backgrounds prior to that, but we had a desire to reinvigorate our culture and reconnect with our spirituality. And I learned so much from Mikai about how to give thanks and acknowledge tobacco as you're planting each seed. And, that translated to the same information I had got from my grandmother, Marlene writing in, who basically said we needed to go and pray by the corn every day. And so I thought that was really beautiful. Two different generations of Pawnee women, but connected by that same spiritual practice and recognition, acknowledgement. This year. This is in a little camp in Pleasantdale, Nebraska. And I tell you what, we have the best helpers in our AmeriCorps volunteers. We have the best helpers in those growers in Nebraska who just share their plots of land and their streamways. And we come together now for about 8 years now. We've come together for a collective harvest, and we're growing every year, and we're looking for more ways to store and more ways to educate the community. But it was beautiful to see our turnout and to see that we were practicing some of the ways we would have actually dried our corn and roasted our corn back in the early 1900s when we first moved to Oklahoma. So as you can see, they're actually roasting that on a bed frame on box springs. We have a young man who came all the way from Seattle, Washington. It was his first time working with the corn. This is Howie Echohawk. And oh, they were amazing. They were wonderful. And we're really grateful to see some intercultural, intergenerational, cross-generational happiness and joy and singing and sharing. And so it was beautiful. We sing to the corn. We harvest together now. We save the husks. For some of our Native American church relatives. We also save the corn silks for tea that battles inflammation. This here in the brown shirt by the bucket is one of our chiefs. As I said, we were given the nod by our traditional council of chiefs to move forward with the seed project. And Pat has been along for the ride for a long time, Pat Leading Fox, and he's had daughters that interned with me through the seed project and then did their own internships. And he comes up and harvests now. It's been a really beautiful perpetuation of the culture. So what is our destiny? You know, where are we going from here? I just wanted to say that our community is growing. They're more aware of gardening. They're asking for the corn. They didn't understand sometimes why we put it in a seed or library status to preserve. But now that we're at a point we're growing more corn, we're able to actually roast some now and not just save it all for seed. So I think that's a beautiful thing. You know, we need this love of corn because it's something that skipped generations of our families. And so here's our contact information. You can follow the project on Facebook or social media. That's mainly it, Facebook. And then this is some of our contributors this year and in the previous years to where we are today. It's been just a pleasure and an honor to speak with you. And I think there's some questions in the chat. And I had just maybe one other thing I was going to say, but let's just open up for questions for a little bit.
Yeah, that sounds great, Electa. So I've collected some of the questions. I'll start with our first one here. You shared that the Pawnee Seed Bank has 19 varieties of corn and other crops. About how many types of Pawnee corn are there traditionally and today? And then how were they prepared and enjoyed?
Well, I think some of that was answered in the final slides there as far as seeing the roasting. We thought, I mean, just from general visiting, discussing, talking to families, you know, we've never done a structured research project on the history of the corn and the exact intersection of when we might have lost it or, you know, had those stories like specifically told for the purpose of food sovereignty, but that would be a wonderful dissertation topic. What I will say is that we love to eat the watermelon, share the watermelon, slice it just like any other watermelon. But we always try to encourage people not to throw the watermelon away. We've had scares where people are like, oh yeah, thanks, we'll take it, and then tossed it. It's just the automatic thing we do today. But I think that people are more aware and conscious of sustainability practices and food waste today. And so I really feel like we're getting closer to people saving their own seed, having more seed keepers growing together and perpetuating in their own families and their own bands what specific types of crops were important to their bands. But we eat it in a corn soup, basically. It's a dried corn that we do. And we also, like I mentioned, we eat it in a blue corn mush.
Both of those are very delicious. I know that. Yeah, thank you so much. And so our next question, can you share any policies that will advance seed preservation efforts for Pawnee people or other tribes? Or what policy changes would you advocate for at either level?
Okay, so one of the first things we can do at the tribal level, the tribal government level, is as we start to practice self-determination, and that's a U.S. federal policy that tribes manage their own programs like education or health, and more recently, real estate and ag. One thing that we can do and keep in mind is that for many of us, not all of us, but many of us, Pawnees, other people that I know, other tribes, they acknowledge the plants as relatives. And so there is rights of nature legislation that has been passed to protect a river in New Zealand. There is rights of nature legislation to protect specific plants and medicinal plants. And the way to get there with policy is through what we call a food and agriculture code. So we're rewriting some of the old Code of Federal Regulations, which tribes and federal governments have in structure. And we're rewriting those from tribal perspective. So if the Blackfeet Nation in Montana, Blackfoot Nation in Montana, they recognize the bison as a member of their board, the bison as a relative, the bison as a member of their ag committee. So with every decision they have in mind, they keep the bison as a relative, for us, the corn as a relative in place. And it's not just men or women or people, it's our plant and animal relatives too that are part of that conversation. So you can look up rights of nature legislation, that's an option. I don't know, it's important to safeguard because we could lose it, we've lost it before, but it's important to acknowledge, and I like to share this nugget, that one of the campaign promises that President Abraham Lincoln had made back in 1860, before he won, he said he wanted to pass the Emancipation Proclamation, and he said he wanted to establish a U.S. Department of Agriculture, and those were campaign promises. And so when he was elected, Emancipation Proclamation, that played out, that occurred. And then also he picked Isaac Newton's nephew as a first administrator of the US Department of Agriculture. So the whole concept of agriculture was built on a foundation of patenting, owning that brand, owning that type, that variety. So it's so important to open your minds and learn more about agricultural biodiversity and different ways of knowing with planting and praying while you plant, only because you can see that it's a whole worldview and it's a whole relationship with spirituality, that we connect with our food, that we don't separate from anything else, because we serve food about every native function. So
yeah, thank you. That's a really great point. And so some folks had questions about social media or where to go to get more information. So I'm glad that you left this slide up for people to check out. And I think Janet has also dropped a few links in the chat as well. But are there any, just before we wrap up, is there something that we can do in US universities to acquaint students with Native agronomy, as well as the thought that culture goes with food and culture together, right? So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes. So you can check out, by day I work for Intertribal Agriculture Council, and we have a technical assistant in each region, which is similar to the regions of like the Bureau of Indian Education, only because we have a originating contract out of the Office of Special Trustee. So today we're a nonprofit, but at one point we developed out of discrimination that was happening with Farm Service Agency loans and USDA services. And so social justice wise, recognizing food systems are inherently political is huge. And then you have the conversations that come along with local regulations, state regulations. And when we implement tribal model food codes, then you'll see that there is language that represents the culture, represents the relationship, represents the rights of nature. Not always happen like that because there's a learning curve and there's a decolonization curve, I would say. But I would just say that it's so crucial to look at the food and ag codes and recognize like who is in control of your food system, whether it be your local grocer or whether it be your school vendor. And then how do you take the reins over your own local food system? So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your story with us today and for sharing the Pawnee Seed Preservation Project with us today. I think we can all see how important prayers and culture and memory are to the preservation work that you and that all of us are doing. And so before we say goodbye today, I just want to remind everyone that this is our second event of a series of events. I did drop more information about our other events for our Indigenous Knowledge and Sustainability Conference with a focus on food this week in the chat for people to register and check out. And later today, we'll hear from Drs. Tiffany Harberger, Kyle White, and Robin Wall-Kimmerer. And tomorrow through Sunday, we'll hear from Ed Spivak, Devin Mahesu, and Elizabeth Hoover. So like I said, information can be found at the site that was provided in the chat. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. And thank you so much, Electa and Janet. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.